So I work in museums, and I have done for quite a number of years. And um, the things that are going on with technology in museums right now are just extraordinary. All kinds of immersive and interactive and AR and VR, great stuff. I'm not going to talk about any of that. Um, I am old school, right? So I don't work in the human computer interface. I work in the human object interface. The exhibitions that I create, um, for the most part, until recently, have lived physically in galleries. My job description is I'm an exhibit developer. I work with exhibition designers, but I am not myself an exhibition designer. I'm the person who conceptualizes the story, takes a pile of facts, finds the stories in them, stories that can be told in exhibitions. I do the research and the writing for exhibitions. So that's my job. Today, I'm going to talk about some things that I know a lot about, what museums do and what exhibitions do. I'm going to talk about some things I know little about, but have a lot of thoughts about, and that's what online exhibitions do and might do. So starting with what museums do, there are certain sort of operations that are fundamental to the practice of museums. One of the main ones is that museums extract things from the world around us and recontextualize them. So that's collecting, right? So this is a picture of Erin Tripp Manzito, thank you. Oh, there she is. I can see it in the future. So this is Erin Manzito Tripp, who is the curator of a curator of botany at the Natural History Museum on campus. She's a lichenologist. So what she's doing is examining lichen in the field. She may or may not choose to collect that lichen. If she does, it will end up in a context like this. So very different from the context in which she found it. Museums hold a lot of things in storage. And that is a part of the preservation of those things. When a museum takes something into its collection, it is for eternity or posterity, which is legally defined as 20 years.
Short eternity.
Museums have most of their collections in storage. So as much as 80% in some museums, but a more common term is 95%. And the British Museum in London admits to having 99% of its collections in storage. Another example of extracting and recontextualizing comes from this building. This is a photograph from the 1930s. It was the big house on a plantation in North Carolina. And in the 1930s, a wealthy collector of American stuff arrived there and extracted from it the facade of the building, the mantelpieces, and a staircase, which now resides at the Winterthur Museum in Delaware, Museum of American Decorative Arts. Just a sense of the recontextualization that happens. Not only is it in a completely different building, but you may not walk on it. So if the definition of a staircase is that it functions to move people from one level to another, this is no longer a staircase. It is a museum artifact. Nobody sits in those chairs either, on pain of death. So extracting and recontextualizing, taking things from their place of origin, the systems in which they reside, and relocating them into a whole other set of systems. So another thing that happens in museums is, having extracted things from the world around us, they purport to represent reality with those things. So now, obviously, any claim to represent reality is problematic. Representations are going to have bias in them. But this is what happens when a museum holds on to all of these things as markers, as some sort of evidence of the real world. This started very early on in the history of museums. One of the origins of museums is what were called cabinets of curiosity, or Kunstkammer. So in this is actually not even a Kunstkammer, it's an image of a Kunstkammer. So it's a representation of the whole world. So you can see all kinds of materials in there, paintings of different things, natural things, things made by people. There's some coins and so on. So this notion of having sort of evidence or representative samples of the whole world was obviously a way of demonstrating one's power over the material world. This has not stopped. So this is from the webpage of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which claims that through their collection you can travel around the world and across time. So this is quite a mastery of some version of reality. So what other operations are happening in museums? Museums discriminate. Now, this word has gotten reasonably a bad rap. At the same time, it also means simply to perceive differences, right? So in this collecting operation that happens, some things are collected, some things are not. And there is a judgment there. We talk about discriminating taste. We talk about things being of museum quality, right? So there's this implication that there's something extra fabulous about what gets taken into museums, and perhaps not something not so fabulous about the things that are not brought into museums. Curatorial selections, recent acquisitions, right? This is the operation that I'm talking about. And in galleries like this one, you can see this. There are some design signals in this room about how special all these things are. So another operation that happens in museums, just huge amounts of categorization, right? So the one indication of that is the departments. So there are departments of different kinds of collections. People specialize in metalwork or Middle Eastern things or sculpture. You can see the sort of lack of logic in these collections, right? Asia and ceramics and glass might not necessarily seem to belong, but these are emergent categories that have developed over time. They're part of the kind of the colonial history, right? So I did check, and there is metalwork from Asia in the metalwork collection. So they're a little fuzzy sometimes too, these categories. Now, not only do these manifest in terms of the specializations and the expertise and the administrative departments, they manifest geographically in the museum itself, right? So you can choose to see a particular subset of the collections, the sculpture, that's not China, as in dishes, that is things from China. Here also is a category of time, right? This is the Victoria and Albert Museum. Both of these are from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And then that same geographic categorization happens among museums, right? So the Museum of American History and the Museum of Natural History collect different things, or do they? So both of those museums contain artifacts created by human beings. The very colonial distinction has been made between things created in European originating cultures and things created in non-industrialized European cultures. So anthropology collections in natural history museums are extremely problematic. Okay, so all kinds of categorizing. Let's see, what else have we got? So these are all the same things that exhibitions do, right? So museums do all of these operations, and those of us who work on exhibitions also do these things. We are recontextualizing, not just because the things are no longer in their system or place of origin, but because we're telling a story about them too. So we're recontextualizing in an exhibition objects and specimens, artifacts and specimens, by what they are supposed to be evidence of, right? And obviously that is up for debate. This notion of representing reality. So objects on display have a very material force. And people who talk about what they like about museums or what museums do talk about facts, right? They just have the facts because they have these material things, right? Museums are among the most trusted institutions in the United States. Some people in surveys say that they trust museums more than their family. You know, given the family, you never know. And then, discrimination is very much a part of this. Some things appear in the exhibition, some things don't. Some things are a really good example of this story, as opposed to other things which might not be, but also what gets to be part of the story, and who is telling the story is very much a part of exhibitions. Okay, so I'm going to do a shift here. I've talked about museums, I've talked about exhibitions, but I'm going to keep talking about exhibitions, but I want to shift from the operations that a museum engages in to the activity of visitors to an exhibition, right? So what is the phenomenology of visiting an exhibition? What do you engage in when you're a visitor? Well, you categorize, right? So when you walk into a gallery that has an exhibition in it, you're going to see a bunch of stuff, right? And there is a very natural assumption that that stuff is there because it all has something in common, right? You know that there are human minds behind this, and it is also just a natural impulse of human cognition to find similarities and differences among things. So you walk into a space, you're like, okay, these things have something in common, but those things over there are in a group, and those things are over there in a group. What's the difference between those two groups, right? And there's a gestalt phenomenon, right? You walk into the space and immediately you haven't read a thing. Maybe you know something about the exhibition, but simply the presence and the arrangements of these things is communicating something to you about what categories things belong in. So here is a stuff on a platform in a case. It is natural to assume, and you are cued also to assume that these things all have something in common. In this instance, you might think that it has something to do with their shape. That would be perfectly legitimate assumption. It is the case. However, the label, the thing that tells you what the intentional is behind this category, is that these are prestige goods that were excavated from an archaeological site in Mexico called Cantona. Okay, so here's that mechanism, that human action at work. And here's another one. So this is actually also at the Winterthur Museum where I worked. So I have some pictures from there. In this instance, we have not just a grouping of things, but some subgroupings, right? So you are being cued to notice that there are three things that are similar in that case to the right, three tankards, to notice that there are two very large pieces of furniture, and it is a cognitive impulse to compare the two of them, right? There are other artifacts which are arrayed in a way that it's easy to see intention behind them, right? Again, the gestalt here is these things both belong together and can be compared to one another. In fact, this is grouped by time. These are all things from the latter half of the 18th century that were made in the US. And then here is an instance of the design affordances, the cues that are being given to you by the designers really emphasize the group, right? So there's a wall here that's in two sections. It's clearly in two sections, and the part of the wall that's closer to us is divided into three. Without even reading any of the text, the cues or the affordances are there to see those differences and similarities between things. Okay, so visitors categorize, they look. Now, this seems sort of obvious, right? Vision is pretty primary to most things that we do. In museums, it is particularly tied to the project of museums, so the work of museums. In one way, it is because you look but don't touch, right? So museums are preserving, and the access that museums allow us is visual. This has been changing over time since we realized that there are educational advantages for people using all of their senses. Nonetheless, we're still trying to keep the acids and oils of our hands off of most of the stuff. The other part of the museum project that looking is part of is that the stuff in it is collected not just for us to look at, but to be studied. And in any kind of museum, art museum, natural history museum, um, the um, the beginnings of all of that research was in what things looked like and how they were shaped, right? So morphology is one of the very first things that people started to engage in all of these disciplines that museums are now organized in. Okay. Something else about looking in an exhibition, you have a lot of control over how long you look at something, what angle you could look at it from, right? You can look, museums are very interested in close looking and studying and really, really coming to know the details of something. Now, I know that this is a term from computing, but I really can't find another way of describing this quality of exhibitions. When you move into a space, when you have this sort of gestalt experience of all this stuff, right? You get to pick where you're going to go first, right? And as somebody who works on exhibitions, I can't count on you reading all the stuff in a particular order or seeing these things in a particular order, right? It's not, random access is not a perfect analogy because you can't immediately transport yourself to any part of an exhibition, but nonetheless, compared to other media, to other storytelling media, you have greater freedom than you would have reading a book or watching a film or listening to somebody tell a story. So that is one of the aspects of the sort of behavior that visitors engage in. What else? Okay, so people are embodied in exhibitions, and this is perhaps one of the most unique things about this medium as a storytelling medium. You physically move yourself through the story, right? You have agency about where you go. But you are also physically present. And one of the implications of this has to do with scale, right? So these are 5 paintings by Vermeer in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Vermeer paintings are, when you've seen reproductions of them and looked at all the details of them, it's a little surprising how small they are, right? So you walk up to this, and in relationship to your own physical presence, here's this extraordinary gem of a thing, right? And that scale thing goes in a different direction also, right? So this is the Megalosaurus in the lobby of the Field Museum in Chicago. Now you can imagine yourself into the bodies of those people as they are, towered over by this creature. But pause for a second and think about your embodiment right now. So you can imagine yourself into those bodies, but right now, you are not seeing that Megalosaurus at the size at which it exists right now, sitting in these chairs or sitting at home and looking at a monitor, right? You're looking, the Megalosaurus cannot get any bigger than the frame around it, regardless of what that frame is, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this illusion of embodiment when we talk about online exhibitions. So another thing about embodiment is that it relates to that random access thing, right? You get to choose where in the story you go. As you move through an exhibition, you are moving through a story, but you're also creating your own story, right? So the way in which you move through the exhibition, different than the way I move through the exhibition, we are actually experiencing different stories there. One of a very common example of this is a big timeline in an exhibition, right? So as I move through these chairs, I am in a metaphorical way moving through time. Each one of these chairs was made at a different time. This is at the Musée de Civilisation in Quebec. So I'm going to go on about embodiment for a little while longer because it's pretty crucial. This is a diagram of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. When you visit that exhibition, you are encouraged to go to the history galleries and to do so in a particular order. You get on an elevator, that elevator takes you all the way down to the lowest level, and you exit onto a very dark place. And this is the part of the story where they're going to talk to you about the Middle Passage, and the trafficking of human beings. It is a very dark time in history. As you move through the rest of the story, words and progressively lighter and lighter, in fact, the contemplative court has a skylight in it. When you reach that level, you are moving through the building, you're moving through time, you're moving through this story, which tells about still not great, but progressively better and better experiences for African American people. So a little bit more about this relationship between now embodiment and the sort of categorization that I was talking about before. This is the outline of a project that I worked on in Idaho. It was a geotourism visitor center. And this is the outlined content of what they wanted to communicate in an exhibition, the stories that they wanted to tell. So first of all, what the heck is geotourism? Then they want to help people understand what are the fun things that they can do regardless of the season they're visiting in. What are the wildlife you might be able to see while you're visiting? History of the area. And part of geotourism is talking about the economy of the place that you're visiting. So agriculture and snow sports are big. Now, an outline is a graphic representation of the relationships between ideas, right? And another way of accomplishing that is with another kind of graphic representation. It's something pretty common that we do when we're planning exhibitions. And you can see here that the relationships among the ideas is reorganized, right? So we've taken that summer winter thing, the fun things to do, and recognize that it's possible to use that as an organizing principle for the story. History does not fit in summer or winter. It remains apart from this duology that's being put together. And then again, something pretty common that happens in exhibitions is that organization, that conceptual organization, gets translated into the floor plan, right? So this is how, when you move your body through this exhibition, you are acting out the relationship between the areas of content in the exhibition. And here is the entrance to that exhibition in the visitor center. You immediately choose between summer and winter. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about as a mechanism, as a visitor behavior, is socializing. So museums were the mission of museums is almost always education, right? But we've come to recognize that the way people actually experience museums is with people, right? You attend with a group of people. Even if you attend alone, you are often choosing to be with a group of people, strangers or not. Family groups are a really important audience for museums. And again, whether you choose to or not, you are in public, right? So even regardless of the people with whom you arrive, you're going to be dealing with other human beings. It's a public experience. Again, very much a part of what happens in what visitors do in exhibitions. So I think of these things as, these are mechanisms by which visitors interface with an exhibition, right? These are the ways that the behaviors that they engage in order to experience a story of this kind, as opposed to a story in a film or a book or a comic book or an oral, a told story. And I think of these as essential or defining mechanisms of this medium, right? So these are the things that characterize the experience that people have in this medium. So what happens when you think about the behaviors or the mechanisms, the interface between people and an online exhibition? Now, before I examine this some more, I want to say some things about online exhibitions in general. My experience with these things had started during the pandemic. So at that time, museums desperately were piling stuff onto their websites as much as possible to continue to fulfill their missions and seem relevant and get funding and keep people employed. And my situation during the pandemic was I was underemployed. So I am a freelancer. I'm a gig worker. It wasn't the pandemic in particular that meant I didn't have a lot to do. I didn't have a lot of projects. That happens sometimes, right? So I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my time? And who knows how long this is going to go on? And how might I be able to turn my skills towards a new medium, a different medium, right? So how could an exhibit developer be useful in creating online exhibitions? So I spent a lot of time looking at them. I submitted a digital humanities advancement grant to the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which we didn't get, but of course, as you know, working on a grant, you accomplish a lot in your thinking about things. So I want to say specifically what I mean by online exhibition, right? Because one of the things I discovered is you click on online exhibition, who knows what you're going to get, right? It could be any number of different kinds of things. So I want to say that here that I am specifically talking about a web-based experience that and you're not in the museum, right? You're experiencing it remotely. You're in your own environment. And one of the things that I discovered in looking at things is that when I went to some of these things, some of them felt more or less exhibity to me, right? In some cases, I looked at something that called itself an online exhibition, and I thought, this is an online database of the museum's collection, right? It's not a story. Or this is a web page, but I don't see what characterizes it specifically as a web page. That's an exhibition, right? So that I got really interested in what that difference was, and what characteristics might be translated from one medium to another. Okay, so back to these mechanisms by which people experience physical exhibitions. How might they apply to online exhibitions? I'm going to take you through some online exhibitions and talk about them as examples. So museums that closed their doors still had exhibitions inside of them, and a lot of museums discovered and told other museums about an application called Matterport, which is used by real estate folks to tour houses. And because it's used by real estate folks and not technologists, right, it's relatively easy to create the illusion of a three-dimensional space with this. So here is, whoops, nope, come back. I have to do this. Okay, so when you go through one of these exhibitions, first of all, you see the whole physical structure of it at first, and you're zoomed into it, right? And you can choose to move through the space. This is a tremendously powerful illusion of embodiment, right? So it is calling on you to imagine being in this space, walking up to a label, being able to read it. If there are multimedia pieces in an exhibition, this will allow you to hear the audio or to watch a video if it's working. And you have this sort of random access experience, right? Because you can choose what of these things, you can move around to any different number of things. And you get some of that Gestalt experience too of, here's this group of things, they've been deliberately placed together. So what is it that I'm supposed to get out of this? Okay, so that example here, so we saw some of those experiences in that one. This is from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. You can see these are their online exhibitions. That's what they're, oh, see, I keep doing that. I have to engage in a different behavior. So you can scroll through. There's a sort of random access quality here about choosing what story you want to watch or you want to look at. This is very visual. The looking thing is very much a piece here. But this is one of those exhibitions where I thought, how is this not just a web page, right? How is this? So the pattern here is one image, one piece of text. Oh, wait, no, here's a group of images that I might be able to form my own conclusions about. I can randomly access these different, there's no, I can randomly access some of that. But again, not very exhibity feeling to me. This is from the Morgan Library Museum. This is in some ways very similar to the one that we just looked at. Online exhibitions, you get to pick the thing you want to look at. You get, again, that pattern of one image, one piece of text. That is a part of experiencing an exhibition, right? You stand next to something, there's a label, right? So it's a little exhibity. In this instance, this experience of the audio, right? And I just want to note the language here. So you're going to go to an audio stop, right? So it doesn't feel very exhibity to me, but it's using the language of moving your body, right? So not so exhibity from my point of view. This one, I felt like there was something going on here that reminded me of the experience that you have in an exhibition. There's this array of things. I can see what they might have in common or what they might be different. I can sort of zoom in, right? So this is analogous to moving my body closer and closer, focusing my vision on a particular detail. And then when I move the cursor and select a different date, I am presented with another array of things. If I went back and forth often enough, I would start to see among those two groupings of things, right? So this is capturing some of the experience of the Gestalt and the a little bit of the random access and so on. So here is a really interesting one. This, yeah, sure.
So, this one is definitely object-based, and the other one was
text-based. Yeah.
Is that the main difference?
No, it is a main difference.
So how would you characterize why this field?
Because it is producing in the sort of categorization of things, it is allowing me to have a similar experience to what I would have in an exhibition. When I walk into it, I see a group of stuff, and then I can decide what to look at first. That's it. It's pretty basic. This is not a complex thing.
So is anybody creative with media? If we go back to that address for a second. One of the limitations of addresses in an exhibit is their static. And in this medium, you could put those dresses on and have them move, and it would be interesting to see how the dresses moved and all of that stuff. So you could do a lot more that you could never afford to do in a physical space. So I think it might be a mistake to exhibity feels like, oh, I want to make it like the static museum, but in fact, we're free to do much, much more.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I didn't know what you were talking about for exhibiting. I'm thinking
that is a great point. And one of the things that I am interested in is the ways in which we bring our expectations and assumptions about one medium into the new one, right? So, yeah.
Sometimes it's a mistake.
Right. It can be limiting. Yeah. Exactly. More to say about that. So here is a pretty cool thing. This is an online exhibition from Google Arts and Culture, which has hundreds of these sorts of presentations. This is an exhibition of one object. It is a collage that includes a piece of the shirt that Abraham was Lincoln was wearing when he was shot, right? So incredibly evocative thing here. An object, but as you move through this online exhibition, as you would if you were just looking at it, you can focus on different parts of it. So in a way, this actually, the single object feels to me like an exhibition in terms of it includes these different things. You can compare them. They have a relationship to one another. That relationship is, in some cases, not clear. In other cases, somebody has written something to explain what you're seeing. So this for me, of those actions that people take in a physical exhibition include some of those in this exhibition, in this online exhibition, right? You have a gestalt about the whole thing. You are being moved closer and further away. You don't have any random access. This is a linear experience. You don't get to choose what you're going to look at next. You can always freeze it, see the whole thing. And then finally, the last example I have, again, it's looking at one object. It does so in a way that includes lots of different objects. So, and you're going to see the very thing that a variety of the thing that you suggested. This thing rotates the object around, so you can look at it from different angles, which is something that you can do in a physical exhibition. It compares it to examples of that thing in its original context, right? So here it is representing a particular kind of reality. You have some random access. You can move through different sections of this exhibition. And there is a multimedia aspect to this as well. It encourages, not at the speed with which I was zooming through it, but it does encourage close and careful looking at it from different angles. There's no sense of that gestalt of seeing something in the context of a bunch of other things, a little bit actually, because it's being compared to those pictures. And there is some random access. I want to reflect a little bit now on those examples that we've just seen, and sort of address some of the things that you're talking about, like, okay, so it doesn't do that, but it does all of these other things. And in fact, what I want to suggest is, in general, one of my main points here is these things that you do when you're in exhibition, in a physical exhibition, they're enjoyable, right? You like doing them. People who go to exhibitions enjoy doing these things. Is there some way of offering that same enjoyment in this other medium, right? So I'm not suggesting that this is the only thing that should happen when museums tell stories about their stuff. I'm just wondering if these mechanisms of the interface in the physical world might also operate in some way online. I'm going to say a little bit more about why I'm talking only about online. Again, I mentioned AR, VR, immersive. There's just tons and tons of things. There's a reason I'm focusing just on this. So one thing about the categorizing in physical exhibitions, that happens as this sort of gestalt thing when you see a bunch of things in front of you. That didn't happen so much in these things that we were looking at. There's a lot of looking. Certainly there's a lot of looking, but with the exception of that last one, it's pretty flattened, right? You don't have the ability to sort of move around and look at things. 3D imagery is very popular and starting to be very popular at museums now as it becomes more affordable. Correct. No, yes, that, but also photography. So you can generate an animated image of something. You can make a picture of it, or you can just photograph it all the way around and then flip that around. um, the random access thing happened, but it was mostly through language, right? So I pick from a list of words or a list of phrases rather than looking at a space full of stuff, and making my own story about it, right? So there is a way in which the experience of agency in a physical exhibition doesn't get reproduced quite so much.
So is random access really valuable, or is if I'm thinking about the exhibitions I went to that really enjoyed, they told stories and a meta story, right? And I think this medium is also very good, and very good at that as
absolutely.
well. I'm not sure I care about completely randomly going. I may want to skip stories or go to some stories or back to stories.
Yeah.
But if you lose the story, it really loses a lot of it. Exhibitions is a lot of that.
And that, I mean, story is very important to exhibitions, absolutely. Not everybody has the experience that you have. Some people want to see the part of the story about the parent and the kid. They're not interested in the other parts of the story. They want to get through it. They want to go right to that, right? And it's doable. I'm not saying it's not doable. It's doable, right? But again, in really parsing the differences in these experiences in online exhibitions, it's usually doable because there's some words, right? Not because you are right. Right. The words get you to the audio.
Your words speak.
Yeah. So, and then the embodiment happens mostly as an illusion, right? So you are imagining yourself, right? You're putting yourself in that. You're still sitting there, right? Or standing on a bus, looking at your phone, like whatever you're doing while you're looking at this thing, you're still seeing this inside this frame. The relationship of your physical body to the stuff that you're looking at is not the same as what happens in a physical exhibition. Scale gets lost in a really big way. And I haven't mentioned anything about socializing in the exhibitions that we just looked at, right? There's an assumption that this is a solitary experience, right? Well, why is that, right? One of the really enjoyable things about looking at all this stuff is talking with people about it, telling stories about your own stuff, right? So I actually, during the lockdown, I tried to visit an exhibition online with friends over Zoom. And it was, doable. We all went to the same place on our computer, and we had some of the experience that you have when you're in an exhibition and you walk around and you discover something and you're like, oh, look at this thing. And then we had to explain to them how to get there, right? Or we could share screen, right? I could say, look, here, this is what I'm going to show it to you, right? So we had some of that. But the fluidity with which you move your body around in company of other people is not happening there, right? I know that it is possible to create that kind of experience because gamers do it all the time. They sit in a room by themselves in the company of people online, the same people, the people they like, the people they know, and they're looking at the same thing and having an interaction with it. Okay.
Did you consider it, or did anybody use artificial intelligence to exhibit? So I'm thinking of there was an exhibit, and something happens that causes that, and I'd love to talk to the explorer or the discoverer, and ask them questions. And there is that, so that
right. The curators are not paid to stand there and explain things.
By embodying the curator,
absolutely, that would be so cool. Yeah, it would be definitely something.
Likewise, you could have the curious person, and this is more like the children's or science museum kind of thing. Could virtually, well, if you get it,
haptics. Again, haptics are an absolute possibility. Yeah.
Even if you say the 1% sitting here, and here's the 99% underneath, that I'm going to do this kind of way out here to this and to the box way over there because it's this.
Oh my God.
Photograph or whatever.
The possibilities are just, they're really endless.
I was a little kid, and we visited Washington, D.C., and went to where Lincoln was assassinated for theater. And then you can walk literally across the street where they rushed Lincoln and he died. And there was the pillow. There was the bed where Lincoln died, and there was the pillow. I remember it as being closed in plexiglass, so actually there was some air and stuff like that. So, Lincoln's, I mean, I remember it, so when I said, oh, there's some hair, that made a major impression. And so, on the one hand, when you had that Lincoln exhibit here, you can't really touch anything, and there with the plexiglass, you couldn't touch it either. So on the most simplistic way, it was a visual experience. Yeah. But there was something that I remember now that's 74, so this is at least 60 years or more that I remember seeing this thing. That is about being in the presence of the actual thing. So that's another difference that's more than just, is it visual, is it touchable, etc. Is there any way to capture something like that?
I don't know. I mean, that's what you're talking about there is embodiment, right? You're physically in the same location as that physical thing, right? That is right. That is one of the essential one of the essential experiences. It's essential to the phenomenology of an exhibition that you are physically in the same place as those things. And that is actually, it is partly an embodied experience, but it's also partly going on in your head. And when you're looking at an online exhibition, your head knows you're not in the same place as those things, right? Yeah. So unless we did something really invasive to your mind, right? Exactly, right? I don't think that is a part of the experience that we're going to be able to reproduce, and I'm not sure I want to because it sounds really creepy. So, what's the point? So I'm getting some sense of what you all think is the point of all of this, right? I'm getting some feedback from you, but the truth is I don't know how this applies to the work of creative technologists. I said at the beginning, the digital part of this is not something I know a lot about. So I continue to be really interested in what everybody's thinking about this, especially folks who are making digital things. What does all of this mean for the user experience? I say visitor experience, you say user experience, it's the same thing. For me, there are a number of things that this has resulted in for me. I learned more about what physical exhibitions do by comparing the two media, right? So if you think about a novel that has been adapted into a film, you learn a lot about what it's possible to do in a novel that's not possible in a film, and vice versa. That's the conversation that we're having, right? The media have different strengths. So I became more knowledgeable about what people do in exhibitions, what is the experience of that. I remain fascinated by this notion of translation between media. Now, we're used to thinking of translating the content, right? The story in the novel, the story in the film. But what I'm interested in here is translating the phenomenological experience of the thing, right? Short of injecting a chip in your brain. What are the things that are enjoyable about one medium? I'm talking about exhibitions, could be talking about anything else, and another, and how might those mechanisms of interface be translated from one to the next. There's also something going on here about expectations, right? So I click on something that says exhibition, and that word means something to me, right? I have I've been to exhibitions, I have some understanding of what that means, and then I go and I look at this thing. My experience was some more exhibity than others, right? So when we use a word like that, when we set up people's expectations, we are influencing how they will experience what they're about to, right? So they might be disappointed. I started to feel a little cynical myself about what museums were doing. There's a sort of bait and switch going on here, right? This is not an exhibition, right? Is there some way that it could be more like one? And then there's all this stuff about metaphors of space. So the ways in which we conceptualize and and talk about the web use a lot of metaphors of space and place. Those metaphors are powerful and misleading about the actual experience that's happening. And that is revealed in this question of embodiment, right? So those metaphors count on you recreating the entire world as being inside that frame. And when we start talking about the physical experience and embodied experience on the internet, the metaphors of how we talk about the web and the understanding of that experience gets all tangled together. I'm not sure what to do with that, but that's one of the things that I felt like became more clear to me. And to the point that you were making, the fact that we already think of the web as a three-dimensional space of some kind, and we're moving a three-dimensional experience into it, has that hampered what kind of experience we can offer people in their interface with objects in a museum collection online because of the limitations of these metaphors? So relatedly and finally, I am wondering if the full capacity of web browsers to engage museum audience visitors, I was about to say, but audiences, to engage museum audiences with their collections, has that capacity been fully plumbed? The ability to afford rich experiences. There's so many cool things happening, as I said. People are publishing about new research. You're seeing these things presented at conferences. None of those papers or presentations are about the web anymore. The web is old news, right? But I want to call your attention to the difference between what's possible and what's in the vast world and what's really happening. So most museums cannot afford that stuff, right? It's just not going to happen. It's cool. They want it. They want to be able to advertise that they have it. The web remains, let me just get through this. The web remains the easiest digital medium, apart from social media, for museums to access in terms of skill and in terms of cost, right? So my question is, did we finish looking at what the web can do? Or did we get distracted by all this other cool stuff that has come down the pike? The hot new thing. And then actually I have one more thing, which is, I said I didn't know what you were thinking, but I have a hope about what you're thinking. I hope you're thinking about museums and the kinds of stories that can get told in museums, the kinds of technology that might be applied to it. I think there's a lot of possibility there. I have left very little time for discussion, but I am nonetheless hoping that we can continue the conversation. Yeah. No.
Okay.
Tell me about it.
It's an online museum about stuff like architecture. In the case, it's about park benches.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Of exhibits of benches. One of the things that I've done takes your screen and removes the top parts of it. So it's like a park bench that you can't sit on all the way.
So
you walk around, it's got high def models, you have to download it and back on it.
right.
Well, it's just really cool.
And you said it's removing your ability to navigate.
You can walk around like any
I see. Right.
out there.
Right. So that is acknowledging that your body is sitting in front of a screen. That's
Exactly.
right. Yeah. Very cool.
So it's an app you download. Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering where you get into the idea that it seems like museums these days have to have the big spectacular thing that comes in and is about some artist or something to generate the money to sustain the whole thing. I'm wondering if there's a way to use like a paper or a newspaper. Well, we've got a greater thing here. You're really interested in this 3D thing that we want to develop, but you need to pay us a little bit so we can do that.
Yeah.
It's like we pay to go to see the Niagara or the custom exhibit at the art museum because it's touring.
Yeah.
And it's generating all of those people coming in, and we can start getting into another 99% of the water versus the 1% that's out.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that's the one thing that would be used. It's easier to say we really like to do this, but we need you to subscribe.
Yeah. Yeah. The business model. I mean, newspapers have been struggling with this also. What's the business model for continuing to be able to operate in a capitalist context with something that people have gotten very used to being free, which is being able to look at things online. I mean, my understanding of advancement in web technology is that it's driven by commerce, right? The coolest things that have happened online are because people think that they can tell you something. This for nonprofits, it's going to remain an issue. Yeah.